apparently there's this way of training elephants where they they take a very young elephant and they tie a rope around the elephant's neck and kind of a leash, and then they attach it to a post in the ground, and the elephant learns to walk around just as far as the rope will let it walk. And whenever it gets to the end of the rope, it feels that tug, and it doesn't go further. So it learns to walk the diameter of that rope. And the interesting thing is, as the elephant grows, whenever it feels that tug, it still kind of minds that circumference that it's learned. And even though now the elephant is enormous and has just incredible strength and could just rip the post out of the ground, it doesn't do that because its nervous system has learned this limit, and it gets that signal in its nervous system to stay within the lane, to stay within its guardrails. And unfortunately, the bad news is we're all like that elephant from time to time. That when we learn certain guardrails as children, it's very hard for our nervous system to relearn them unless you know how to go about it. And that's what I want to talk about. I'm remembering a similar thing. When I was in high school, I was at a friend's house, and I was sitting at their kind of kitchen table, their family table, with my friend and his sister. And his sister was opening magazines, and she was pulling out little cards that you could send in to order the magazine or something. And she was just filling out all these cards. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I just love filling these out." And I hated filling in those cards because I hated having to write, staying in the little box. It made me very nervous, and I would be very careful. And I looked at hers, and she'd go outside of the box, and she said, "Oh, I just love filling them out, and I fill them out however I want." And she had no fear about crossing the lines. It was like she was not the kid who colored within the lines. So in any case, when we were in a situation as a child where somehow we were taught a limitation, whether we had any part in that experience or any choice, we learn those limits just because that's how our nervous system works. Like we learn, if we have a strict teacher, we'll learn to not speak up, perhaps. Or if we have, family members that look down upon a certain type of behavior, we'll learn to stay in our lane, so to speak. So what can we do about that? Well, it's very interesting. What happens is, as we're adults, just like that elephant, whenever we get into a situation that our mind perceives to be similar, it's like our nervous system immediately projects back to that younger, diminished self, that part of us that isn't bold or that feels disempowered. And it's just a learned response. And it's actually a form of age regression. You may not be becoming a 6-year-old kid, but part of you is going back into that moment. And it's not so bad that we're going back into that moment, but we're relating this moment to that earlier time, and we're not going back with our capacities as an adult, right? Like since that time, we may have developed all these different mental capacities, physical capacities. We've learned hundreds of things in school and work and all these things, but when we get into that context that sort of triggers our brain in that way, all of a sudden we're that younger self again. So there are a bunch of different techniques you can use to correct this. And this buddy of mine, Clint Matheny, has a great blog post about this that I'll link in this talk. And he calls this technique Back to the Future because it's very much like the movie Back to the Future. In the movie, the character has this opportunity to go back in time, and he's able to correct some things that happened so that when he finally gets back to the present, everything has evolved in a different way. And in a certain sense, that's what we want to do. Now, I'm not going to do a whole demo of it now, but I'll talk you through some of the structure, and maybe at least unconsciously, you can start to go through that and teach your unconscious mind how to do that. So what you want to do is, first trace the feeling back to, okay, when was an earlier time, perhaps even the earliest time when this habit was formed. Maybe a teacher looked at you the wrong way or said you weren't good at something. And unfortunately, because you're a little kid, you take it in, and you might feel bad in that moment, not realizing that tomorrow you might be a very different kid. So you trace the feeling back to an early time or the earliest time. And then what you actually want to do is step outside of that experience and step outside as your adult self, as yourself now with all these new capacities, and just observe your younger self there and see this little guy or gal and see them in that situation. And the minute I look at my younger self, I have some empathy. I'm like, oh, that little Rob is trying his best. And then you can get curious, like, what kind of capacities that you have now would you share with that younger self? If you could pull your younger self aside before that moment and give him or her some tips or some reassurance. I would give my younger self just some perspective and just say, hey, in time, you're going to do great. So, don't worry about this. You're going to get it. Keep learning, keep growing. And what you want to do is really have that talk, or, even sort of energetically bond. I'm using a sort of spiritual word, but just give good feelings, good support to that younger you, and see how they respond taking that in. It's like, wow, this person's here from the future. And then you can there's a couple ways you can do it. You can see them, you can watch them from the outside starting to grow up with that new information, with that new support. And then what you can do is you can pop back into that younger you, imagining, getting this kind of love and support and wisdom from this older person. And imagine what it would have been like to grow up with that understanding, with that knowledge. Maybe all these things that you thought about yourself weren't true. Maybe you could be good with math or whatever it is that made you feel small at that time. And imagine growing up with all those capacities and capabilities. And this is a way of kind of reliving a past moment so that you can learn from it, so that you can update this old experience that you're referring to in your day-to-day moment. So by updating this past, it's like, oh, now I'm great with math. So imagine if I was great, if I knew that I was going to be great with math then, I would have shrugged off what this person said and just jumped in and kept going. And I've mentioned this saying a bunch of times. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. And this is a way of giving yourself that happy childhood and updating these earlier experiences that, like I was saying, you're referencing them. What I mean by that is you're walking down the street, and whenever you see a situation that's similar to that, your brain is kind of pinging back to that earlier time. So when we update this image, when your brain pings back, it's like, oh, great, math, I'm all I'm all in. That's great. I'm looking forward to that. So this is a little bit about this technique. Like I said, my friend Clint calls it back to the future. In NLP, we call it changing personal history. And you can certainly read up on that. I will put links. I'm sorry, I'll put Clint's link in the notes, and I hope you give it a shot, because it's a great, powerful technique.